Okay, welcome back to our teaching on the Song of Solomon. We had just began chapter 2. We went through verse 1, 2, and 3, and now we're going to go to verse 4. It says in the NAS, "He has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love." Now this is very interesting. He has brought me to his banquet hall, and his banner over me is love. As it says in the King James, he has brought me into his banqueting house. His banner over me is love. But if we go to Rotherham's, it reads it this way: "He has brought me into the house of wine, and his banner over me is love." The house of wine. This is very interesting. I've looked up this phrase in the Hebrew. It's Strong's number 3196. It's the Hebrew word yayin, and it literally means a house of wine or the secured upper room. Now, here's what it is showing us. In today's world, a wine is kept in a house in what we call a wine cellar, right? You have a cold, cool room downstairs, and the wine is kept on shelves, and it's kept out of sunlight, and that's where it's kept cool and kept good. Now, if you live in the ancient times, though, and your wine is stored in skins, and you live in an area that is very, very rocky, and digging root cellars is very, very, very difficult and very costly. A lot of times it means chiseling through solid rock. Christ's tomb was chiseled out of solid rock, and that is typical. What the people did with their wine was, their best wine, they kept it hanging in the skins in an upper room. Now, this upper room is also called their banqueting hall or their treasure room. In this special room, which they would keep locked, it was only open for certain occasions and only if the master of the house was there. It had a nice table, and it had the wines hanging by their months, on racks. And that's also where the money of the house was kept. This is the treasure room. Unlike the kings of Europe that would dig big basements for their wine and their gold, remember? You've seen pictures of that. Their gold room was always in the basement, right? That's where the wine was too. But in the Middle East, it was always in an upper room. Why? Well, because the master of the house is going to defend his yard, his courtyard, his first floor, before you can ever get to that last floor where his treasures are kept. You see, you have to fight your way through that whole place to get to that treasure upstairs. And the cool part of the day began in the roof of the house. Peter was praying where? On the roof of his house, when he got the vision of the blanket let down with all form of unclean animals in it. Why was he up there? Because it was the cool part of the day. The sun was setting, there was trees around shading. It was a lot cooler up there than inside the house. Now in the banqueting hall, it quite often was had a lot of windows. You could open them up by opening up shutters, let breeze blow through. It was nice and cool in the evening. And the master of the house would bring special friends there, or the king, and they would recline at the table and share of his great wine and a little bread and cheese, and the coolness of the day. Now, if it was a special person, and in the person's banqueting hall was of a high rank of some sort, they would have printed a banner. And they would put a banner over the doorway or outside over the windows, so all walking by would see who the guest is in the great man's house. And the banner might say, "My friend Tony is here. Tony of Tarsus is here." And so everybody's walking by and they're looking, they're going, "Oh, wow, Tony of Tarsus is here and be the talk of the whole town. And he's being given the best wine. He's in the treasure room. He's being trusted. He's in the most treasured place in the whole house. But here, she's proclaiming, he has brought me into his, here it says banqueting hall, and my margin, it says the house of wine, or the room of wine, the room of the wine, where the wine is kept. And it's the treasure room. She's proclaiming this because only the best, only the highest honored people are allowed to go there. They're not invited there if it's a commoner or it's just business. You're downstairs at the table. And the best wine isn't brought. But if you're someone special, then you go to the house of wine or the room of the wine and the treasures. And then it says, and his banner over me is love. So this is a very special person in the king's house, in his treasure room. A very special person is being honored, and there's a banner over top of her chair or her reclining position. And the banner over her is love. Now it's interesting, here we see a new word for love. It's not the word for boiling hot love, and it's not the word for the love of a friend. It's Strong's number 160. And it's from the word, number 157, the love of a friend, or man's love. But if you look at how it's used, this speaks of God's love in a different manner. It speaks of God's love. And what it means is this: it is love that is not satisfied. What do you call that? Unrequited love. It's not satisfied. It's never satisfied. It's not just number 157 or 158, which is man's love, different derivatives of man's love. When it becomes 160, all of a sudden, it is unrequited love. It is God's love that is never satisfied. It is God's love that has never had enough. And we'll look at that a little more in the next verse. That word love in Strong's number 160 is ahaba. It's love toward another person, love of humanity, love of one's treasure. But even more than that, it is the love that is never satisfied. The love that is never satisfied. We'll talk about that some more. Let's go to verse 5. She goes on and she says, sustain me, I'm reading from the NAS, with raisin cakes, refresh me with apples because I'm lovesick. Now, let me just give you a little history lesson here. There aren't apples, or at least in that day, there were not apples being grown in the Middle East. It's too hot. It's too hot. But apricots grow really well. Apricots grow really, really well. And apricots are very fragrant. You know, with the flower, the blossom of it is very, very fragrant. The King James wrote apples, and it's carried over in the NES. But here in my NES is a number 12 that refers me to the bottom of the page, and it says literally apricots. Why not just put apricots in the verse? See, the daughter translations of the King James don't want to sway very far from the King James, so they don't want to sound very different. That's a frustration of mine, by the way, if you haven't noticed. Keep listening, you'll notice. Sustain me with raisin cakes, in the NAS it says. That's actually not a bad translation. It is a very poor translation, though, in the King James, which says, stay me with flagons. Comfort me with apples. for I am sick of love. What's that sound like? What's that sound like to you? That's a horrible translation. Stay me with flagons. What's a flagon? It's a skin bottle of wine. So keep me going with flagons. Hold me up with flagons of wine. In other words, give me another round, bartender. Comfort me with apples. They didn't have apples. So what's an apple going to do for a drunkard? Give her another drink. She'll like the apples then. What? Then it says, for I am sick of love. Oh, now this is not painting a good picture. So she's drunk, she wants apples, and she's sick of love. Let me tell you what it really says before it goes any further. You see how bad that translation is? It's terrible. In the NES, it's closer. Sustain me with raisin cakes. Refresh me with apricots, because I'm lovesick. Okay, that makes more sense. That sounds better. In Rotherham's, it reads this way: sustain me with raisin cakes, which is true, which is literal. Refresh me with apples, so they messed up there, it's apricots. For sick with love I am. So she's not sick of love. In other words, oh, I've had too much, I'm sick of that. That's not what she's saying. She's saying, I'm so in love, I'm sick. I'm so in love, I'm sick. Big difference, isn't it? Huge difference. Now, the raisin cakes are very interesting because it's literally dried pressed raisins made into cakes or little wafers. It was a way to keep grapes, raisins. And they would take grapes, pressed grapes, especially after they've made wine, and then they'd make raisins or raisin cakes out of it. They would dry it, freeze, like a freeze dry, a drying process, and press it down and be a thick, gooey cake. And you let that sit in your house of wine, you know, as one of the refreshments to eat with your very fancy wine, right? Well, it makes a lot of sense. Sustain me with raisin cakes. Why? Because they're full of sugar. They give you strength. The raisin cakes are full of sugar. You eat that, it's like getting a sugar high. Plus, it tastes wonderful. Refresh me with apricots, fresh apricots. Also, what does fresh apricots have? A lot of moisture, a lot of flavor, and sugar, even more sugar. She says, because I'm lovesick. I'm lovesick. Now it's interesting, the raisin cakes, they're pressed and they're dried out, which represents this. We gain strength, the sugar, and a great taste, the sweetness of the Lord, through trials and tribulations which press us and even dry us out. The church says you're not a blessed church if you're not in revival all the time. That's not true. That's not true. Blessed are you in the desert. Blessed are you in the desert. Because the day of refreshing is coming, when the Lord is going to sustain you or strengthen you with raisin cakes that are because you've been pressed out. You've been pressed out. You've gone through the desert. I'm going to continue this on our next teaching in 15-minute truths on the Song of Solomon. Lord bless you until we come together again.